Hi, we're at Doyle's Cafe and the Tea Party, and we're going to have some speakers tonight. This is Catch of the Day Video News.
Hi, I welcome you all to the Jamaica Plain Republican meeting for February 16. I identify the JP Republicans as Ward 11, which is where we are now, and the ward that I'm the chair of, and Ward 19, which consists of most of JP, and also Ward 10. George is chair of Ward 19, and we want to welcome Rachel Kemp, who is our state committee woman. That's the 2nd Suffolk, and she's your chair of 14. No, well, she's also city committee chair. So, and because this is a Republican meeting, and this is what I understand we do, and we have one, before we do anything else, we should say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now Mr. Gass, who's the first speaker, he can speak over here. Everybody have a seat. Some of us can sit around the table, but come on. You're used to being able to have everybody around one table.
Yeah, it does come in a bottle, so if you want to yeah, you can grab a
People can sit on it by the table. Our meeting, and you can pick up the agenda that's right over here, has 2 parts. The first is on a presentation of the Common Core curriculum that is being, or in the process of being introduced in Massachusetts, and the referendum on Common Core. Jamie Gass is the policy specialist at the Pioneer Institute, and Patrick Humphreys is the president of the Greater Boston Tea Party. So the second half will be about the elections that are going to be going on March 1, most particularly the state committee offices of state committee men, state committee women for the 2nd Suffolk, which is where we are, which is the one senatorial district in Massachusetts. It's totally inside the city of Boston. And if anybody has anything more to say, we may also discuss presidential elections, because that's the same day primary. And so, Mr. Gass.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank Ed and all of you for the invitation to come and talk with you a little bit about the Common Core. But first, I want to just tell you a little bit about Pioneer Institute. So Pioneer Institute is an independent, nonpartisan think tank that's been in Massachusetts for a little over 25 years. We are known for kind of calling it like we see it, with independent, peer-reviewed, data-driven research. And again, in the full interest of sort of full disclosure, we are nonpartisan. So while, you know, speaking at a Republican event, I see lots of Democratic sort of paraphernalia and figures around us. There's somewhere in here
There's a few Republicans on the wall. Ed Brooks is near the bathrooms.
Good, good. But that at least gives me some sort of bipartisan cover. Anyway, well, I'll begin by kind of telling you what Common Core is. Even though basically 40 some odd states have adopted Common Core, the reality of it is a big portion of the general population, a lot of state legislators across the country, and a lot of public officials really don't know an awful lot about it. But what Common Core is a set of national English and math standards that were developed by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Those are 2 Washington, D.C. based lobby groups that got an enormous amount of funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation, and you know Bill Gates, he's the founder of Microsoft. has pumped well over $200 million into the advocacy and the development of Common Core. And then Common Core is supposed to be met with national tests, and there are two national testing consortia. There's the PARC testing consortia, which Massachusetts is sort of half in and half out of, and then there's the Smarter Balance testing consortia, and states like Connecticut and New Hampshire and a variety of western states are in those testing consortia. So that kind of gives you the sort of the groundwork. 40 some odd states adopted. Most states, 95% of the states, adopted through a federal grant program called Race to the Top. In 2009, part of the stimulus package, the Obama administration and the U.S. Department of Education had a $4.3 billion grant program that made states compete for that sort of big bundle of money. And Massachusetts got about $250 million in order to adopt the Common Core, and that was one of the criteria in this Race to the Top. So I want to give you a little bit of historical context to kind of help us understand why we're discussing national standards and tests and how we sort of got here. The reality of it is that under our Constitution, the federal government really has no role to play, if any, in K-12 education. That is in the Constitution, and it's something that's built way into the traditions, the legal and financial traditions of the country. 90% of the funding for K-12 education comes from the state and local government. So the federal imprint, really until the last 30, 40 years, has been tiny. And that's really the way the founders intended it. They wanted to have public education serve as a wellspring for our democracy. They primarily wanted to have students that were able to be educated enough about the basic principles of the country so that we could perpetuate our Constitution and our democratic form of government. And that arrangement has actually worked quite well. If you look at the history of the country, we basically have gone from a small collection of colonies along the eastern seaboard and within a little over 200 years become the most powerful country in the world. That's no small accomplishment, and a lot of that was driven by the wellspring of learning that came out of the public schools and fed into the development of our democracy. But there's no question that sometime after World War II, experts began to see measurable declines in the academic quality of public education in this country. There were always inequities, there's no question. There were some states that were higher performing, and there's no question that certain parts of the population weren't being educated the way they're entitled to for their birthright. But there's no question that we were declining. We saw declines. And we really began to fall pretty dramatically. And by really by 1983, President Reagan had initiated a commission called which was called, they authored a report called A Nation at Risk. And the Nation at Risk report basically said that if we had the system of public education imposed on us by a foreign enemy, that it would be, it would be like an act of war. It had gotten so bad. But what the Nation at Risk report did not do was come up with lots of top-down prescriptions on how to fix the problem. It understood, and people across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, everybody understood that education is the proper legal and financial jurisdiction of the states and localities. But around that time, some of these Washington, D.C. based lobby groups, during the 80s, Bill Bennett, the Secretary of Education, and President Reagan, called these trade groups, education trade groups that are in Washington, D.C., the D.C. Edu Blob. And they began to develop this idea that in order for the United States to reform itself in K-12 education, what it needed to do was have national standards, national tests, and national curriculum the way they do in a lot of the countries in Western Europe. I think it's an important thing to remember. Our neighbors to the north, Canada, who we probably share the most with in terms of our background and our sort of outlook about government, they don't have any national Department of Education. In 1979, President Carter established the U.S. Department of Education. But there were a lot of restrictions, which I'll talk about later, that prevented it from really having much of a role at all. So there were variety of different kind of state efforts, parent-led efforts, big efforts for school choice to expand the choice opportunities for parents. And at the same time, there's these DC groups that are beginning to say, got to have national standards, got to have national tests, got to have national curriculum, it's got to be controlled from the top. Well, here in Massachusetts, we're actually really quite fortunate because while the rest of the country continued to be in sort of various degrees of stagnation and decline, we had really remarkable bipartisan leadership in 1993. Bill Weld, Republican governor, worked with Tom Birmingham, who later became the Senate President of Massachusetts, and is a senior fellow at Pioneer Institute where I work now, and Mark Roosevelt, who was a state rep from Beacon Hill. These three public officials got together and they crafted the landmark 1993 Educational Reform Act. And what they decided to do, it's called the Grand Bargain, and what they decided to do was put an enormous investment of additional dollars, both at the state level and a minimum threshold that all localities had to spend. And we've spent well over $100 billion since 1993 boosting public education. And it was in exchange for a return to high-quality academic standards in English, math, science, and history. We weren't going to be doing soft skills. We weren't going to be doing new math. We weren't going to do any of that. It's kind of back to basics. And those standards were going to be matched with our state graduation test, which is the MCAS test. You folks know about that. A bunch of charter schools that gave parents, particularly poor and minority parents, greater choice, largely in our urban districts. There was some teacher testing, and then there was a kind of an accountability agency that was provided MRIs, sort of educational MRIs of school districts to tell everybody where the money was going, how the students were doing, how the staff was being evaluated, how it was being governed. And this grand bargain of the money in exchange for the standards and the tests and the accountability has served this state remarkably well. So as I said, the rest of the country has continued to be in stagnation and decline. But since 1993, we essentially have gone from a middle-of-the-pack state to #1 in the country and internationally competitive. We're the only state in the union that can make that claim. There's a test called the NAEP test. It's the Nation's Report Card. It's taken every couple of years. It's in reading and it's in math. They also have it in science and history. But it's taken every couple of years. All states take it. It's been around for about 40 years. No state in the history of that test has ever been #1 in every grade test tested, in every category tested. And in 2005, Massachusetts was the first one to do that. And then we did that again in 2007, 2009, 2011, and 2013. Patrick has heard me say this before. It's like winning the World Series 5 times in a row and doing it in 4 straight games each time. It is a remarkable accomplishment that exceeds all of the wildest expectations of the people who wrote the law. Does it mean that all of the ed reform in this state is complete? No. There's an enormous amount of work left to be done. But we have made tremendous and historic strides. Now, in that Nation at Risk report that I talked about under President Reagan, the real goal was to always compete internationally. The game in the 21st century is competing with Hong Kong and Singapore and South Korea and Japan, sort of East Asian tigers, right? Well, in 2007, Massachusetts tested as its own individual country. It was one of only 2 states in the union to do it. Tested as our own individual country on this gold standard of international math and science testing. And guess what? Our 8th graders were tied for #1 in the world, and our 4th and 8th graders were among the top 3 or 4 in the world in math. Again, remarkable accomplishment. We did that again in 2013. If being #1 in the country is like winning the World Series 5 times in a row, then these successes on this international testing is like winning Olympic gold medals. And that's the good news. The basic framework for that accomplishment, for these results and accomplishment, was built back in 1993. And it went largely untouched. It was each successive governor and grouping of legislative leaders continued to make sure that the money and the commitment to the standards and the tests continued. And that really began to change in 2006. A lot of the people that were opposed to MCAS and the higher standards began to coalesce around Governor Patrick. He was never a fan of the MCAS. He ran on a platform of ditching testing. And what happened is that in 2009, when the stimulus package was passed and the race to the top was developed, here was an opportunity for Governor Patrick to ditch our standards, ditch the MCAS, and get $250 million in the process. And that is precisely what happened. So the standards and really the tests on which our successes were based were given away for $250 million, even though the Commonwealth had spent over $100 billion, that's billion with a B, to be #1 in the country in international competitive. So Pioneer, where I work, we are known for research. That's really what we're known for. And so we thought at that time that someone ought to take a look at these standards and say, how does the Common Core compare with high standard states like Massachusetts, and we looked at other states too, Indiana, Texas, Minnesota, California, other high standard states. And we got a remarkable woman named Sandra Stotsky, who worked on the standards here in Massachusetts, but also worked in other states. And she's the kind of academic expert that even the folks who had been our advocates of Common Core, they used to rely on her to evaluate the quality of standards. So we coupled her with a guy named Jim Milgram. He's a professor of mathematics at Stanford University. There aren't very many high-quality mathematicians who are also interested in K-12 education. But we got these two researchers together to look at the academic quality of Common Core against Massachusetts and other states. And there were 4 various drafts of the Common Core. We did 40, 50-page reports, crosswalking back and forth between Massachusetts and Common Core standards every step of the way. We've done an enormous amount of additional work on all the features of it since then. But the bottom line is that Common Core is significantly lower than what Massachusetts had previously. The secret to our success in reading was a commitment to classic literature, poetry, and drama. That was it. 90% of what kids were learning in classrooms, irrespective of zip code or background, was classic literature, poetry, and drama. It's things like Huckleberry Finn, it's things like Sherlock Holmes, it's Agatha Christie, it's Charles Dickens, all the things that are kind of the hallmark of a liberal arts education. It also matters too, because frankly, when you're reading books like Huckleberry Finn, you're learning about friendship, you're learning about all the things that make human beings human, right? It helps develop the kind of citizens and the kind of people that you want to share your community with, that you want voting. It humanizes children, reading high-quality literature. On top of it, the vocabulary is better, the difficulty of the text is better, it challenges them, and it has prepared them extraordinarily well for every testing site. SAT, ACT, international tests, national tests. On the math side, the secret to success in Massachusetts on these international math tests was having access to Algebra 1, which is the gateway for all high-level math, by the 8th grade. That's what they do in the East Asian countries, that's what they did in California, that's what they did in Minnesota. All the high standards, high-performing places do that. Under Common Core, access to Algebra 1 is pushed forward. And so we're, both in Massachusetts but across the country, anyone who's using Common Core math is going to basically be 2 years behind their international competitors because they only get full access to Algebra 1 by the beginning or middle part of 10th grade. So they've lost 2 years, 2 full years. In the world of the global economy, losing 2 years to your competitors in the preparation of your kids in math and science is like being decades behind, right?
Jay, is that what you meant by new math when you were speaking before?
Yeah, it's sort of I'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's basically rather than doing standard algorithms, it's having kids draw pictures and explain math and write about math, everything but actually doing it. So the next piece of research we looked at is the legality, because I mentioned at the beginning there are actually 3 federal laws that explicitly prohibits the federal government from funding or directing or validating or promoting national standards or tests. So we got the General Counsel and Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Education under the second Bush administration, the 2 highest ranking lawyers in the federal government in education. And what these guys mapped out in line and verse is that there are 3 federal laws. There's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was signed by Lyndon Johnson, not exactly a Tea Party president. There's the General Education Provisions Act of 1970, signed by Richard Nixon, Republican. And then there's the enabling legislation that set up the U.S. Department of Education itself under President Carter. 2 of the 3 presidents that signed the laws prohibiting the feds from what they've done on Common Core were pretty liberal Democrats. This is not an issue of partisanship. This is an issue of the rule of law, right? But don't take my word for it or the lawyer's word for it. There's a column here that was written a couple years ago by George Will. He cites the same laws. He did a column 2 years before this and cited our research, right? George Will, probably one of the best respected syndicated columnists in the country in the last 30 years, okay? The final piece of research that we've done is on the cost, because the reality of it is that even though 40 some odd states adopted, 98% of the states, their governors, their budget offices, boards of education, departments of education, none of them did a cost analysis. The Gates Foundation has pumped over $200 million into this, but no one, except for Pioneer, has done a cost analysis. We had a cost analysis done by a guy who had worked for the first Bush administration, but he also worked for the U.S. Department of Education under the first administration of President Clinton. So he worked for both Republicans and Democrats. He was the kind of Capitol Hill staffer that was in the room when former President Clinton and former Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole and former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich were negotiating federal education policy. Very seasoned guy. He and his team of researchers came up with a figure of about $16 billion. That's what's going to cost states and localities across the country to implement the Common Core. In Massachusetts, the figure is, which is actually a lowball figure, but it's in the $350, $400 million. So after we have spent over $100 billion to be number 1 in the country and internationally competitive, we have to spend an additional $400 million to adopt and align our textbooks and our testing with demonstrably lower quality standards. It's crazy, folks, right? No one makes decisions like this. No sane people make decisions like this, right? The good news of this is that the more people have gotten to hear about this all over the country, and you've heard it in presidential debates, you've heard it on Fox, you've heard it on any kind of cable news, C-SPAN, what have you, is the more people find out about it, the more irritated they've gotten. Because on top of all the problems with it, the reality of it is our public officials of both parties, and I want to be clear about that. Jeb Bush, big Common Core backer, right? Until just a couple months ago, Chris Christie, big Common Core backer, right? Until, a couple months ago, people didn't know as much about this. But as they've learned more about it, they become really irritated and they become educated and active on it. I've gone to like 20 some odd states in the last 4 years or 5 years, and I've spoken to audiences in front of people, 5 people and 900 people. And let me tell you, usually the audiences are about 75% women. It's usually moms and grandmothers. And the basic thing is they can't do their math homework with their kid, right? Because it's all this crazy math where my 8-year-old daughter calls it cut the pizza in half math. Rather than doing just standard equations, they have kids writing about it. They've got incredibly complicated processes for doing basic arithmetic, right? And the good news is that as people have gotten active, right here in Massachusetts, and it's worth acknowledging both Patrick, but also Donna Colorio and the Common Core Forum, they have done hundreds of events all over Massachusetts, hundreds. And they also have gotten themselves very well organized, really in a kind of a David Goliath kind of dynamic, where they've actually gotten this topic on the ballot. And Pioneer, because we're independent and nonpartisan, we don't take a position on it. However, you can draw your own conclusions about my opinion. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I hope this has been helpful, and I appreciate all your attention to it.
So my question is, where is Governor Baker in all of this?
It's a great question. So in 2010, Governor Baker ran on a platform that had a strong anti-Common Core, anti-park position. When he ran in 2014, it was a little more ambiguous. Doesn't really talk about it very much. But the reality of it is that just this past fall, the state had a big decision in front of it. It could continue on with the previous MCAS, which I think was our Pioneer's preferred position, or it was going to adopt Park. Really what they decided to do, and it was at the urging of the Baker administration, is to do an MCAS 2.0, which in principle sounds good. It's sort of an updated version of MCAS. The problem with that is that the person who really, determines a lot of the composition of the test is Mitchell Chester, who was the Commissioner of Education under Deval Patrick, and oversaw an enormous amount of damage that was done to not only the standards, not only killing off the U.S. history test, not only beating up on charter schools, not only ditching the State Accountability Office that held districts accountable, but a variety of overt conflicts of interest where he was taking money and being flown around the country by the advocates of the Common Core. And this was reported on by Channel 5 and other places. This guy still has his job, and he's the one who makes the decision about what the composition of MCAS 2.0 is. And he has said publicly, from the day that they decided to do this, that MCAS 2.0 is basically going to be 80 or 90% Park, which is the Common Core test, right? So we have a moment here where, in theory, we can get ourselves out of the Common Core. The reality of it is that any day, Governor Baker could stand up in front of the State House and say, I've passed an executive order and we're getting out of this, right? That has not happened yet. So he could do that. That's why I think that the public input that the ballot initiative has offered is a good option for people to think about. And I think it's also important, whether it's the legislature or the governor or whoever, is to, and I would say this under Governor Patrick or Governor Baker, irrespective, it's important to hold public officials accountable and ask them and let them know your opinion on the topic. So, I don't know if that's helped, but that's my thumbnail.
Yes, so is the question definitely going to be on the ballot this year?
That's something to ask Patrick about in his presentation.
The ballot question,
I'll address that.
and any questions about it should be directed to Patrick.
Yeah.
After we.
Because I don't have any, I monitor it because it's part of my job, but I'm not connected to it, the validation. Okay.
Has Massachusetts received the money that we were supposed to get
Yeah.
for the Common Core? And are there strings attached if we try to get off of it in terms of paying back the money?
Yeah. So the $250 million that Governor Patrick accepted for the race to the top, only a fraction of that went to Common Core, right? And that was $250 million over 4 years. So we got the money in 2010, and by 2014 it was gone. The reality of it is that's an enormous amount of money, but in comparison to the $9 billion we are spending annually at the state and local level, it's really a drop in the bucket. But that money has been spent. And the reality of it is the feds are not supposed to be, they're not supposed to in any way, shape, or form be funding or directing or validating this. So at any point, the state could walk away from that. And on top of that, and it's a very controversial piece of legislation, but the No Child Left Behind law was just reauthorized by Republican Congress and Democratic President, and it's very explicit in that the U.S. Department of Education cannot use Common Core as a criteria for any kind of either carrots or sticks, federal carrots and sticks. So that issue should really be off the table.
And there's no clawback provision at this point.
I mean, the U.S. Department of Education is, at least for the next year or so, with the Obama administration, is not going to be welcoming states to leave Common Core or this park consortium because they paid for the development of the park test, which they were not supposed to do. But they're not going to be encouraging states to do it, but it's a very difficult thing, particularly a high-performing state. We're #1 in the country. That's an enormous leverage point. And so it could very easily be done. Other governors have done it.
It would seem like it would be #1 with an easier test too. I'm just joking.
Yeah, but the thing is that states like Oklahoma, which is an average performing state, they're already out. There's other states that have gotten out too. And so it could be done. And those are states that frankly had a lot less to lose than Massachusetts, because they're average performing states. We're at the top. I mean, the race to the top was the race to be Massachusetts. Yep.
I came here tonight to support Common Core.
Good.
And I got involved in it back in the 80s and early 90s when my kids were attending school. And Mr. Hirsch, can you tell us who he is?
Sure.
Edward Hirsch?
Sure. So there's a guy named E.D. Hirsch. He is a retired professor of the University of Virginia. We've done a bunch of events with him. He's generally regarded one of the best standards experts in the country. And
isn't he the grandfather of the Common Core?
No, he was not.
The original concept.
No,
What happened to it?
he was not. He played no role in the development of Common Core, and he played no role in any of the development of the questions related to the park test. And I know that because I've asked him that on email, and we've done a bunch of events.
He's now edited books
Yep.
that read what your student needs to
Yep.
learn in 6th grade,
Yep.
5th grade.
He-
I went through him, and I wish I had this education.
I agree with that. I agree with that. That's why we did a couple events with him. I have to say, I think he is a great man and a great educator. But in all honesty, he does not have a record of improving student achievement the way we have in
Well, that's
Massachusetts.
because what he's proposed has been taken over by the politicians, the administrators, and it's become
Generally speaking, the things that are in his book, cultural literacy, the kind of subjects and the kind of information that's in cultural literacy is precisely what the Common Core curriculum drains away from the humanities side of the education. You read less classical,
I just
fewer
read 5
classics,
pages in this
you
book
are less
explaining the basis
conversant
of our
with historical
Constitution,
facts,
the
all of those
core
things.
philosophers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, so E.D. Hirsch is a retired English professor, right? But Common Core cuts literature by 60% in Massachusetts.
Well, Massachusetts may have a great program, but I spent some time in the South in the 70s,
Well-
and boy, do they have need. Here in Boston,
I think
how did
that,
the
sir,
students
I think
in
that's
the-
true. I think that is true. But the governor, the Board of Education, the legislature, and the $100 billion that have been invested in education in Massachusetts, that's our responsibility.
and you
The
did a
responsibility of
great job,
education
and
in
it should be
Arkansas
modeled for
is the
whole
responsibility of that state.
country. Okay, but here in Boston, I just saw numbers recently. How many kids in 3rd grade and in 8th grade in the Boston public school system passed and were qualified to move on? What percentage? It was in the 30s.
That's right, but having a lower standard is not the way to make sure that those kids succeed.
No, but having a program and having the staff who can teach it to them is what we need.
What I'm trying to tell you is that the standards that Massachusetts had that led to these historic gains, no one in the country, not E.D. Hirsch, no state, has a record that can rival that. We had standards that were better than what E.D. Hirsch
How do you
offers.
implement that to the other 49 states?
Well, that's a separate issue. If you want to file a bill in the House of Representatives and have it go through a regular lawmaking process and have the president sign it for national standards, that's one thing. But that's not what was done on this. There were no hearings at the federal level. There were no bills filed. There was no presidential signing of the Common Core.
Because this was all done at the state level.
It was not, well, that's not accurate, sir. Most states adopted through the Race to the Top, which is a federal program. So,
I did a TV show about a year and a half ago about, Common Core is going to talk about English and math first.
Yep.
But on the sex education aspects of it, it's a who's who of the pro-abortion industry.
Yep.
CCUS,
Yep.
Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, and
Yep.
International, and then a whole bunch of other people that are pro-aborts. What, I mean, is it going to be accepted if the first two get in, math and English, then we're going to eventually have all these pro-aborts teaching sex ed?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that some of the earliest advocates for a kind of Common Core, a national standard test and curriculum, the first effort was in the Clinton administration in the early 1990s. And they started off with history. And the U.S. Senate voted like 99-1 to vote down the history standards because they weren't very good and there was all these kinds of politically correct problems with them. And so I think that it's the same kind of players that a lot of the folks that worked in the Clinton administration went to Achieve Inc., they went to the Governors Association, they went to the Council of Chief State School Officers, and they found their moment. Now, they started with English and math. There is a framework out there, which Massachusetts, frankly, just adopted a couple months ago, which dumbs down our science standards. There's a framework out there for history. We've got the best history standards in the country that have basically been sitting on a shelf since 2009 because Governor Patrick killed those off too. I think the advocates for Common Core want to start with this, but I think it would be foolish to believe that they don't want to have national standards in English, math, science, and history. I've never seen anything on the health side, but I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it.
Can you speak to, I've been to a lot of Common Core presentations, and what you were talking about is the tip of the iceberg of the subject. So I wanted to ask you about one of the things that I generally hear in these presentations, and that there is a component to the Common Core program connected with data collection.
Yep. Sure. So we did a paper a couple years ago now. We had Georgetown law educated lawyer, Harvard Law School educated lawyer, and then a woman who'd done a lot of research in and around the student privacy and parental privacy issue. And it's a big paper. It's probably 80 pages. It's got 500 footnotes. I mean, it's very, very well researched. It's called Cogs in the Machine. The data collection and the student privacy issues are not in Common Core itself, but they run parallel to it. To really understand what it is that these advocates of national standards have in mind is to understand that they don't really want to have K-12 education function for educating for democracy. What they want is a sort of nationalized workforce development system. They want to have and if you're going to make those kinds of picking and choosing what career tracks kids are going to be going on, which I have to say I think is incredibly undemocratic idea on the face of it alone. But if you want to make all those decisions in a centrally decided way, then you got to collect all this information, all this data. And a lot of it, there's like 400 pieces of data that run parallel to the National Testing Consortia and the Labor Department, who was also kind of in the mix here. And it's just, I mean, there are federal laws. They're called FERPA laws. They are parental privacy laws that have been essentially brushed aside or gutted in order to have them begin to kind of do this. Is this happening wholesale right now? It's hard to say, but the architects of the Common Core and the policies that kind of run parallel to it make it pretty clear what they're trying to do. It's all kind of a backdoor effort for a more nationalized system, and collecting data on students, a lot of it being non-academic data, is something at least runs parallel to it. I don't know if that's helpful. The report, and if a good way to learn about the data collection is a woman named Jane Robbins. If you Google her name, she did a video that got something like 30 or 40,000 views. She was one of the authors of our report, and it explains in a pretty short, comprehensive way about this data collection and student privacy.
as I understand it,
Yep.
okay, if this end of the program is fully implemented, then when your child graduates from high school, the educational system will have a complete intellectual, biological, psychological profile of your child, down to questions about sex, questions about religion, questions about you, and it will be used to decide for that child what they think that person is good for, rather than you and your child making the decision.
That's sick.
What that child is what for?
What it's good for. We've slotted that person. We got all this information. We know where this child will go.
The thing you have to understand is that
It's only an assumption.
in a lot of countries in the world, they have a more nationalized workforce development program. It's not any conspiratorial thing. This is what they do in places like Germany. They have tests that sort of track kids and send them in different paths. It's been going on for generations.
Send them into different paths after they graduate from high school.
Well, you know, again,
How can you force somebody into a path?
part of what the design of this, there's a letter, you can read it. It was read into the congressional record by a former congressman from Colorado. There's a letter called the Dear Hillary letter. It was written by a guy named Mark Tucker, who is DC's sort of advocate of a more nationalized workforce development model. He's been open about this for decades. But he wrote a letter in the early 90s, right after President Clinton was elected, and it maps out essentially a desire to have a more nationalized approach to K-12 education with a direction towards workforce development.
With a direction towards workforce
Yeah.
development, what does that mean?
What that means is that through feedback from local employers and local employment boards and
Feedback
workforce training, regional workforce training groups, they would start matching students with either colleges or careers that the bureaucrats think is appropriate for them.
Well, that's the same. You're talking about a guidance counselor, aren't you?
Well,
This is a guidance counselor on steroids.
so I mean,
But that's only a recommendation.
Yeah.
And
Yes, but
I
then-
can see how you could funnel
You got a
people.
profile,
You
you
could
you
funnel
qualify
people,
for
but it's
certain
still-
educational institutions.
you could
You
funnel
get your
people, but
student
it's still
loans,
personal
you get your
choice.
grants based on you making decisions they have already chosen for you.
the thing I want
If you decide
There
you
could
want to
be a
become a
carrot
nuclear
behind there.
physicist,
We'll,
and
if
they
you
think
follow our
you're,
recommendation, we'll help you with scholarships and
But
things like
if
that.
you decide you want to
Is that
become a
what you're
nuclear
afraid of?
physicist, and they think you're a tool and die cutter, you're going to get money to go to the vocational school. You're not going to get money to go to the...
That's Orwellian, isn't it?
Well, but that's the way people who think they should be running society and
I
the
guess,
world
who
think.
are these people who are doing this?
That's wild. That's really wild.
My principal objection to this is that the government doesn't know things, it always gets things wrong. If this program were in place in the 70s, they would have trained people to become Xerox machine operators,
And
or to work in factories that are now automated. You know, they will prepare you for jobs that will no longer exist by the time you become an adult.
Okay.
The
Governments
thing
are good at
that
this.
one of the things I want to emphasize, so Massachusetts has the best charter schools in the country, and we've got the best voc tech schools in the country, so maybe no group of schools in Massachusetts have seen greater academic improvement under the old standards and under the MCAS than the voc tech schools. So even if parents pick, and I think that's the key here, parents should get to pick where their kid goes to school.
Oh, absolutely.
If your parents pick a vocational route, the voc tech schools have benefited enormously from this more academic focus, because it turns out if you want to be a carpenter or a machine shop or what have you, you got to be able to read well and you got to be able to do mathematics, right?
You have to know how our government works.
And that's another component.
Civics.
But what I'm saying is that the lesson for Massachusetts, and then I'll wrap up because I want to be respectful of your time, is that the lesson for Massachusetts is that the state and local officials need to be in control of their own destiny.
Amen.
It is paid for locally. It is a state and local obligation.
We all agree
And so
that education
the
should be
way
left
to
at state
retain that is to get yourself out of the Common Core, say no to the park testing,
I agree.
and continue on the path that we've been on for 20 years that has made us #1 in the country in international
I agree we don't need.
Mr. Gass, I invited Kathleen Healy
Yep.
to come, and she's a student of some of this stuff. I will ask her if she has any comments.
If you have any questions.
Can I ask one question? One other question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Tomorrow, they're gonna be, the Boston Public School teachers are gonna be protesting up at the State House. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
What
do you
time?
find that that group is detrimental towards?
It's been very complicated because the teachers' unions have been generally opposed to all testing. So while they're against the park testing, that we're sort of, again, half in and out and half out of, they've also always been opposed, or many times have been opposed to the MCAS testing too. But the new president, or somewhat new, president of the MTA, Barbara Mataloni, she was elected really as an upset on an anti-Common Core, anti-park platform. So this doesn't cut down neatly Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. I mean, one of the states where the pushback has been the toughest has been New York, which is certainly a pretty blue state. The teachers' unions have been upset about it. Upstate, parents have been irate about it. Long Island parents, demographically very different folks, but their commonality is they hate the Common Core, and it's enormously unpopular. Polling after polling, Gallup, all kinds of polls have been done for the last several years. It's very unpopular with parents, and the limited data that we have is that it's pretty unpopular with teachers. I don't know if that answers your question.
One question. You said Oklahoma opted to get out,
Yep.
correct? Oklahoma's standard, you said, was like medium in the country.
Yeah.
So are those results that Oklahoma is getting, are they less than what Common Core standards
No,
are?
their performance was average on the standards that they had before Common Core. They are now in the process
If they meet
of revising their standards. And the state really to look at is Texas, because Texas from the beginning, it's a slightly above average state, it's a big state. But what they did is that when the race to the top was in Common Core was being developed, they immediately said, we are not doing it. And what they did is they got Sandra Stotsky, who developed the standards in Massachusetts, and they got Jim Milgram, who developed the math standards in California.
That's fine.
Now Texas has the best standards in the country. They use the experts that we use to evaluate.
The only repercussions from opting out of Common Core is money, correct? Federal money?
Yes, but
At this point, it's not even the money. The money's gone.
Well, you're getting money if you adopt Common Core standards.
Not anymore.
correct?
Not anymore. That was a one-time. That was one-time money over 4 years.
Then why do they want to let
To
the federal
implement Common
government
Core, you have to rip out your computer systems, put in brand new computer systems. There are certain types of
There's no
companies
incentive for this.
that stand to make millions upon millions because you will have to buy their textbooks.
Jamie, a very important question. If you're a parent from Massachusetts and you want to avoid Common Core, is there anywhere to go?
So that's a great question, because I am a parent in Massachusetts.
Right.
My daughter goes to public schools in
Did
Newton.
Catholic schools adopt Common Core in
So
Massachusetts?
the Archdiocese of Boston Catholic schools adopted Common Core.
So back to the question. If you
Yeah.
want to avoid Common
Now
Core,
there are
where do you
some non-affiliated Catholic schools, non-Archdiocese Catholic schools that did not adopt. And there was a group of parents that went and started their own school, Catholic school, out in Natick, I think it is. And I mean, it's all. Can't remember the name off the top of my head, to be honest. I don't think that's it, but
That is
But
a,
are all public schools now on Common Core in Massachusetts?
they're in various degrees of aligning their local curriculum with Common
did
Core.
not Cambridge reject Park?
Yeah, I mean, again, Park is about a little more than half the districts have decided to. I mean, this isn't, so we decided to do MCAS 2.0, and you'd think that would be a hard stop, that Park would stop in Massachusetts. That's not what happened. The commissioners continued to recruit districts into Park.
My son is in the 8th grade.
Yep,
He's taking algebra right now.
that's great.
He's not in the 10th grade. He's in an advanced program.
Yep.
You said with Common Core,
Right.
algebra is not introduced until the
Right.
10th grade.
No, that's the thing is that it's not like hitting a light switch. The changeover doesn't happen immediately. I mean, we've already seen. I mean, put it this way, we've already seen some damage. We're no longer #1 in 8th grade reading in the United States. That's the first time that has happened in a decade. And it just happened to coincide with the 5 years in which we were beginning to switch over to Common Core.
Kathleen,
So,
do you have something to introduce yourself?
Okay, let me just.
I wonder if I can make one deal. I've got some books here. They're $10 each. The cost of them is more than $10, but we're trying to sell them. And we did an event at the National Press Club. It's on C-SPAN. It's got all of the synthesizing and summarizing all the major research here. So I just make an appeal for that.
Is it brief?
Brief.
I don't have $10
In a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, so this mic is going, but I have to switch this.
I spoke to Kathleen a couple of days ago in Weymouth, at the Weymouth Tea Party gathering. She seemed to have some expertise in this matter, so I suggested you come.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
It's not a PA, it's just a recording.
Oh, it's not. Okay. Okay, good evening then. I'm Dr. Kathleen Healy. I hold a PhD in Human Development and Organizational Development from the Fielding Institute, as well as a master's degree from there and a master's in counseling psychology. I've, for the last 15 years, been working in after-school programs in Worcester with low-income students. And I was already in the process of writing a book because I felt like if people could see what I saw on a daily basis, they wouldn't make the decisions about education that they make. At the time that I was almost finished with the book, I started to hear about Common Core. And I wasn't sure whether this was something that I needed to look into that was serious or it was another educational fad. My mother was a second grade teacher in New York State. There's a lot of educational fads just like there's a lot of business fads. The more I looked into it, the more it seemed like they were making it confusing on purpose. Like, why do they not want us to know about this? What is it about Common Core that's, that they don't want us to know? And the place that I ended up finding the most information was on Facebook. Because what's happened is the parents that have started to do the homework, they put everything into the schools in about 2010. They switched over all the textbooks. They did this very quietly. It was like Obamacare for children. But they didn't want to vote on it, so they just did it quietly. They thought no one would notice, and then by the time you noticed, it would be too late for you to do anything about it. But the parents found out about it, and they started to object, and they started to organize. And the place they organized is on Facebook. The other people that were organizing were the teachers, because teachers in the beginning had to sign non-disclosure agreements that they would not talk about this, that they would not give their opinion on it. There's actually states trying to enact legislation right now that teachers will be punished for saying bad things about testing or the federal government. So when they did this, it went into the schools, and so people kind of said, well, what is this math? What are we seeing here? So I just want to read you, I actually was also a tutor for an 8-year-old last year who was doing math. And the math was so bad I started taking pictures of it. And I'm just going to read this to you. Okay, this is 3rd grade math, subtraction. This is the problem. Apple Hill is 568 feet high. Banana Hill is 293 feet high. How many feet higher is Apple Hill than Banana Hill? If I had a chalkboard, I could take the two numbers and we could subtract them, and you would know what the answer is, but that's not how they're teaching them to do it. So step 1, start with 568. Subtract the 200s and 293. 568 minus 200 equals 368. So far, 200 have been subtracted. Step 2. Now start with 368. Subtract the 9 tens and 293. Oh, there's not enough 10s, so subtract the 6 tens that are there. 368 minus 60 equals 308. Then subtract the tens that are left. 9 tens minus 6 tens equals 3 tens. 308 minus 30 equals 278. So far, 200 plus 60 plus 30 equals 290 has been subtracted. Now step 3, 8-year-old. Start with 278. Subtract the 3 ones in 293. 278 minus 3 equals 275. In all, 200 plus 60 plus 30 plus 3 equals 293 has been subtracted. So Apple Hill is 275 feet higher than Banana Hill. That's 3rd grade math.
That's ridiculous.
2nd grade math, and I found this out because I live next door to 11 children, and they bring their homework to me. 2nd grade math, they came and said, Kathleen, we have to go to summer school for math for 2nd grade. In some schools in Oklahoma, I believe they sent all the kids to summer school for math. Half the kids in the morning, half the kids in the afternoon. This is just to learn 2nd grade math. So in 2nd grade math, the example is, it tells the kids you can add 2 plus 2 and 4 plus 4 because those are doubles. But 7 plus 6, you can't add that. You have to draw it. So you have to keep the big number, the 7, and take the little number, the 6, and break it up into even littler numbers so that it equals our friend 10. So everything is about making 10, drawing 10. The third grader that I worked with was from Pakistan. They actually brought their child here to get a better education, and then they instituted Common Core. And I was helping him with his math homework because they couldn't make any sense out of it. And so when they sent home the multiplication, if you're multiplying 4 times 5, you have to draw 4 circles with 5 dots in it and count the dots. Never memorize anything. If you ask this boy what 9 times 9 is, he will go to the kitchen counter and go like this. 81. Sometimes he comes up with 84. That's a good trick. I couldn't do that myself, but that's what he does. And that's what they're learning to do. Now, when people talk about what the cost of Common Core is, the $250 million or $16 billion or whatever it's going to cost, what I'm mostly concerned about is the cost to the children. Because if you learn 2nd grade math, that you have to draw everything, you don't have anything in long-term memory that you can draw on so that you can do higher math. And I've already had the 5th grade girl say to her sister, I can't help you with that math, we didn't learn it that way. So because they instituted it all at the same time, every different school and every different grade has a different variety of what this is. And what it's going to be, these kids are going to have no foundation. They have no foundation right now. I'm concerned about the cost to them. Thank you.
Okay, Pat Humphreys is president of the Greater Boston Tea Party, and he is also a member of the organization Stop Common Core.
And Common Core Massachusetts, and Common Core MA, and also Common Core Forum.
Okay, that's right, Common Core Forum.
On Facebook, it's Stop
Common Core. Okay, well, that's what I remember. They see you on Facebook. Yes, a sufficient number of signatures were gathered to put something on the ballot. And even I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Well, I know it's Stop Common Core, but what exactly the mechanism is, I haven't looked into yet.
Okay. Well, first off, since it came up during Jamie's discussion about workforce development, I actually had remembered this, so I hadn't planned to use this, but I will. This is a quote from Rex Tillerson, CEO of Exxon Mobil. I'm not sure public understands that we're their customers, big business. That we, the business community, are your customer. What they don't understand is they are producing a product, your children, a product at the end of that high school graduation. He didn't stop there. Now, is that product in the form that we, customer, can use, or is it defective and we're not interested? That's talking about your children. It's a little scary when you think about it. So certainly there is a component of workforce development to all of this that is out there, and that's why the people like Bill Gates and others are in it for a certain reason.
I always have one question. I don't know if I have an answer to this, and that is, does Sidwell Friends have a Common Core curriculum?
Of course not.
No.
No.
They don't.
No.
Bill
Okay.
Gates' child doesn't have a
No,
Common Core
they're
curriculum?
completely and totally exempt from it, of course.
Secretary Duncan, same thing. He's sends his kids to private schools in Chicago. They're not Common Core compliant.
Okay. So, talking about the activism, especially as it is occurring in Massachusetts, and actually there's quite a bit of angst about Common Core across the nation. I want you to pass that paper around. One thing that we have on our side is truth and common sense. That there is another thing that came up during the discussion was the math involved. During the signature gathering process, I found this illustration on Facebook, essentially of Common Core math. And I think about everybody who is gathering signatures put it on the back of their clipboard, because all you need to do is show it to parents. They would see it, they'd go, "Oh my goodness, that's what my kids are bringing home. Let me sign." Because they were, as Jamie noted, so fed up with having to deal with the screwy math that they couldn't help their children with. People in the STEM professions, college-educated parents, were having difficulty helping their kids. And it wasn't because they couldn't teach them math, they couldn't teach them to do it the right way, the Common Core way. Because if you don't do it the Common Core way, it's wrong. Points off. So, people in this state have become very active on this. And for all the things that Jamie has noted, there was no reason for us to dump the standards that we had. Best results in the country, highest standards. The rest of the country should have been mimicking us. They should have been coming to us and asking us how we did it.
And that's what Texas did.
Texas
And
did
stole a
that.
march from us.
Yes. But the thing is that for us to accept lower standards was completely insane. As Jamie noted, it started in July of 2010 with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education signed off on it, and there we go. Yes?
I don't understand, if we have better standards, there are states all over the country who can't meet the current standards, and they're getting waivers. Can't we get a waiver for doing better than the standards?
Well, the standards, have to understand that the goal of this is to have the standards imposed nationwide so that if a person moves from Massachusetts to Alabama, that they're being graded the same way. That thing is, everything is portable. It's not necessarily about better education, it's about raising the rest of the country up.
Well, we need to do that.
Well, that is fine. And as Jamie noted,
Massachusetts shouldn't be penalized in the process of doing that.
no state should be penalized in the process of doing that. They all should seek their higher standards. Again, Jamie was pointing out, the wonder of our country is that we have 50 laboratories of democracy or of innovation in all of our 50 states. We should all be trying to achieve the best that we can. In those states that are lower performing, they can try to adopt, they may want to adopt Common Core, they may want to try and shoot for the sky and go after our standards. But the problem is that these are federally, I won't say mandated, but being federally pushed, incentivized, thank you, standards that are being pushed upon the states. This is wrong, and Massachusetts has been in the forefront of fighting this. Common Core Forum was formed a couple of years ago. Actually, you mentioned I was a part of a Tea Party. We actually had Dr. Stotsky at a meeting in July of 2013, I think before they actually started the forums, because my predecessor had recognized the issues with Common Core and was concerned about it. Over the past year or so, Jamie, Dr. Stotsky, and other people probably put on somewhere between 45 and 50 different forums across the state where they would go in and they have several hours of discussion like this and discuss Common Core, educate parents and talk to them and tell them why we needed to be against this. The question is, how do we actually get it changed? Well, in spite of even having a Republican government being put in place, it didn't seem like things were going to happen magically. They decided to have a ballot initiative. The ballot initiative essentially says, go back to pre-2010 standards. Go back to the standards that brought us to number 1. Go back to our own, develop our own standards. Have those standards be researched. We've got some of the greatest educational schools and the biggest brain trust in this state. It's world renowned. It's phenomenal. Develop those standards locally. Share those standards with people if they want. Develop our own tests. Yes?
But what are we going to do for these 60% of the kids in the public schools in Boston right now who aren't up to standard?
So, I mean, Pioneer Institute, we're big charter school advocates. We've got the best charter schools in the country. Research after research after research. Let me just finish. So, researchers from MIT, Stanford, Duke, Harvard have all, in piles of research, said that Massachusetts has the best charter schools in the country. They are closing the achievement gap between poor and minority kids and white kids like no public schools in the United States. The charter schools in Boston take kids that are oftentimes a couple of years behind, and it has them outperforming the kids in Weston, right? They are demolishing the achievement gaps. We need to have more of those. There's a cap. There's actually a ballot initiative on that too. There's legislation in the legislature on the cap on charter schools.
And those
so we need.
schools are by lottery.
They're all by lottery.
Not pick students.
No, and they are all So charter schools are a great option. We've got Metco, which is an outstanding option. We have Voc Tech schools.
All these new charter schools, like we don't have doctors to provide the services and insurance now. Do we have the teachers?
Yes, I mean there's about 40,000 students in Massachusetts that are on a wait list to get into a charter school. 40,000, right? We have 30,000 kids that are in these schools, or 35,000 that are in these schools. There is an enormous demand for these schools. They are excellent. They're academically excellent. We need to have more of those. We need to have more Voc Tech. We need to have more opportunities in school choice through Metco. And from my point of view, we should have vouchers that provide parents, particularly urban parents, with more choices. So their kids can go to Milton Academy the way Deval Patrick did.
Right. And yes, basically the answer is not to lower the standards. You lower the standards, you lose. We rose up because we raised the standards, we improved the curricula, we did all the right things. Going back on those things is the wrong way to go. If there are pockets of where people are not achieving, then you address those specific pockets of schools or failing school systems like Holyoke
Boston.
And Boston. Can places do better? Absolutely. But the answer isn't to lower the hole down, it's to raise those people up.
Absolutely.
That's what you do. So we need to first get rid of Common Core. It's a very simple thing to do. And that's what the ballot initiative is about. First of all, with the ballot initiative, End Common Core MA was the organization that is primarily geared towards the ballot initiative process. They were the ones who were doing the push cards, and I have some of those push cards here. They were the people who were going out gathering signatures, talking to people. That math program, we had those clipboards with that math problem on it. We were trying to educate people as we were going along. What we found is that many people who weren't parents didn't know what we were talking about. Also, back in April 15th of last year, we also had a lobby day on Beacon Hill, where I think it's somewhere 100 to 120 people showed up, and we actually went and talked to all the legislators or their staffs, representatives. It was incredible how many of our representatives and senators or or people within their staffs did not know what Common Core is. It's been in effect in this state for 5 and coming on 6 years now. They didn't know what it was.
Are you aware that Bill O'Reilly didn't know what Common Core is? In a
I'm not surprised.
conversation with
They-
Dr. What's his name? His buddy?
Why would anybody who is pushing something, especially in Massachusetts, go out there and say, oh, by the way, we're going to implement some new standards. They're lower, but it's going to be good for you.
And we get $250 million.
We get $250 million, which, you know, is a little less than a drop in the bucket compared to the $100 billion we spent over the last 20 plus years improving our education to where it's top in the country and world competitive.
If Common Core is such a bad idea, and the way they teach the children is so twisted, why has it gotten so much momentum? Why has it been implemented in so many places?
Because it was being pushed by Bill and Melinda Gates, the Gates Foundation, $200 million out there. People, as Jamie talked about the history, Massachusetts took it under our purview to say we're going to make ourselves better. The rest of the country didn't do that. Individual states were doing their own things, possibly, but not in the way that, you know, some people apparently liked. They want a better product out there, your children, to be better.
You have to remember, in Stanford, the governor, Patrick, was very, very close to the Obama administration.
Yes.
This was all done without, no legislature passed this anywhere in the country. It was implemented directly through the education bureaucracy, aided and abetted by private entities, some of whom were funded by Bill Gates, and some of whom are textbook companies that stand to make a lot of money.
So in most cases, the Common Core standard would raise the standard in a state?
No.
I am of a personal opinion that if they're teaching math that way and they're taking out classical literature, they're lowering everybody's standards. However, since ours are at the top, what the plan overall is to go to the middle. Okay, if you want to, I mean, I have no doubt that there's an ideology behind this. And part of that ideology is to make everybody equal, and it's a lot easier to cut down the overachievers than to raise the underachievers. Okay, it's much easier to lower the ceiling than to raise the floor.
Okay.
So you may be trying to get Mississippi better, but you can split the difference by making Massachusetts worse.
I mean, the reason why they're able to get so many states to adopt is if Massachusetts is here, and Mississippi's here, it's just a law of averages. They're going to go to the middle. That's how they got so many states to adopt. The 40-some-odd states were never going to adopt the Massachusetts standards, and they were never going to spend what we were going to spend. And they were never going to make sure that they had high-quality teacher testing and high-quality charter schools, like all the things that we did for 20 years. And so Massachusetts had to drop it, and that's exactly what happened. That is what is going on right now. It didn't just happen in the past. It is an ongoing problem. Our standards have been significantly dumbed down in the last 5 years. Significantly.
Where's the outrage?
Well, it was
We are it.
sold to the businesses at this level, okay? So it's sold as workforce development at this level, that all the children in every state are going to be equal, and you can go from New York to California, and you would be in the same class.
I've heard
And
this.
so all of that. So that was sold to the Chamber of Commerce and all the different businesses. It wasn't until it hit the parents and it hit the grandparents that there was any outrage. Because these people are still thinking, oh, everything's wonderful because now everybody's going to be equal and even. And Massachusetts is going to do this and Mississippi's going to do this and everybody will be fine. That's how it was sold to them.
True, and what has happened, I mean, you have high-powered business leaders who are behind this. In Massachusetts, one of the primary organizations pushing it is the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, who actually was involved back in the early 90s in developing the wonderful standards we have today, but now they're actually...
They didn't play any role in developing the
Oh, I'm
standards.
sorry.
They were advocating for the 93 Ed Reform Law.
Just
Okay.
one more thing I'd like to
Thank
have clear in my head. I asked about Oklahoma and their middle, and they dropped Common Core. And they dropped Common Core because why?
their standards were less than what Common Core was. But they didn't want to do Common Core. Why not? Why are they against raising?
Is all the federal entanglements. Yeah, they didn't want to have people in Washington.
Or was it just, as you're saying, the federal?
The woman who drove it is named Jenny White. She lives in Oklahoma City, and they didn't take money. They didn't win Race to the Top money. So even though there was a strong effort by Jeb Bush to advocate for the Common Core in Oklahoma ultimately, driven by these moms, frankly, the same way it's been here with Donna Colorio and the people that push back. It really has been a mom-driven movement from Indiana to Oklahoma to Massachusetts. I mean, the places that have pushed back against it, it's really been mom-driven. But the big issue, the quality is a big one because the parents can't do the math homework with the kids. That's a big issue. And then what's happened is people learn more about it, they've gotten themselves educated about it, and they realize there's all these federal strings attached, and they don't like that either. And especially in sort of redder states, they like it even less. But, it's also been very unpopular in New York, which is a pretty blue state.
So once you adopt
So in
Common
New York
Core,
State, where I'm from, 200,000 students refused the test last year. There are actually protests in the streets in New York because they're a year ahead of us in the implementation.
Yeah.
once you adopt Common Core, that's the last time you ever have any say.
In the curriculum of your state.
It's copyrighted. They're not allowed to change it. The teachers are allowed to add 15%, you can't change it.
Yes.
That means your state representatives, your state school boards, they don't have control over it anymore. Bureaucrats somewhere, you don't even know this. Mr. Gannon.
Yes.
I'm hearing about Common Core, uncommon core, this, that, and the next thing. I know of 3 schools in Boston. 1, William Lloyd Garrison. 2, William Lloyd Garrison, and
Burke?
No. Girls Latin and boys Latin.
Yep.
Okay.
What happened to those students? Were they deficient in any way in terms of their teaching and their learning?
What happens to the exam schools?
And they were not exam schools as such.
They all
have to have it.
They all have to, the state test, right now, I mean, so.
He's asking if they're allowed to go beyond the standards.
Well, the thing that's different about what the way it works under Common Core than was under MCAS is that there's a part of the race to the top was also a teacher evaluation system, which was never present with the MCAS. So maybe for the first couple of years, teachers don't have to do it, and they can go higher. But the problem is if their teacher evaluations are connected to the test scores that are measuring Common Core and they're not teaching it, they're going to get penalized. I use this as an example. It's kind of a dramatic example. Moby Dick was written in Pittsfield, right? That's where Herman Melville wrote it. You could be a teacher in Pittsfield. You could read and work on Moby Dick with your students. The problem is it's not in Common Core. It will not be on the test. And then when you're evaluated, you've wasted time. So what are you going to do? Maybe the first couple of years you really love it and you've been teaching it forever, you'll do it. But over time you're going to say, you know what? My evaluation, I'm going to lower evaluation for teaching Moby Dick. So I'm going to teach whatever is on the test or what's on the standards. I can tell you it's not.
I want to hear something about those Latin schools.
They all have to, if it's the state standard and it's the state test, whether it's a charter school or voc tech school or exam school, any public school has to implement this because that is what the state test is, it's the state standard, and the teacher evaluation is based on that.
In other words, one size fits all.
Yeah.
Common. That's the common in Common Core.
They won't have time to excel because they'll have to.
Well, it's also a philosophy.
Well, also-
so it's a philosophy of the person who wrote it. So the person who wrote the English standards, who basically will go on YouTube and say, I wasn't qualified to write this, but I was less qualified to write the math, so that's why I wrote the English standards. And he believes in something called closed reading. which is you give children an article of some kind, and a lot of it is nonfiction, and you don't give them any background or context whatsoever. So they can read the Gettysburg Address, but they won't know it was in the Civil War. They won't know that it was the turning point. They won't know Abraham Lincoln said it, and they won't know anything about that.
In Common Core?
Yes.
I just read, I tell you, I just read in 5
I will tell
pages
you, can
in
I
the 5th grade.
address that for a second?
Yeah, the 4 philosophers who are constitutional.
I can address that for a second.
Okay.
They just chose the name Common Core because they based it on this guy. They thought everybody will think it's E.B. Hirsch.
So you're
and
telling me
it's
the
not.
Common Core I believe in isn't Common Core
It's
as we
not
know
at
it
all.
today. That's the problem.
That's-
Not Common Core.
It's not what
It's
you
it's
think it
being
is.
So all
called.
labeling.
It's how it was sold.
Okay,
But that's not what it
absolutely.
is.
Absolutely, that's the politicians and the.
So Patrick,
Yeah.
2 questions. So I want you to be very specific exactly what happens if it's passed. First of all, the state legislature has to vote on it, right?
Yes. So what happened?
Go through the mechanism.
Okay, let me go through the mechanism.
And
talk
the
about
wording
that.
of the bill.
Well, I already talked about the 5 different
Okay.
portions of the bill.
Okay.
The process is that we had to get 65,000 and change certified signatures. And a certified signature means that somebody signed it, it went to your town clerk, they verified it was you, there wasn't any wet stains on the paper or whatever. We turned in 120 or so thousand raw signatures, they certified 80+ thousand of them. So we meet that hurdle, at that hurdle. Sorry. We found that out in mid-December. January, we received a bill number, and the legislature over the next, up through May, can decide to take it up or not. They're not going to tell us. They're just going to kind of leave us hanging. We're assuming they're not going to take it up. It's out there. There were, I don't remember how many ballot initiatives there were this year. There's close to a dozen. There's quite a few, including the charter school cap lift. There's already been action on the charter school cap because I remember Charlie Baker actually was in front of the legislature and testifying.
Baker's out front in that one, right?
Governor Baker is very much in favor of charter school cap
So
lifting.
Pioneer is opposed to Common Core. We're in favor of charter schools. We don't take any position on the ballot. But one thing that's really instructive here is that the charter school ballot was really driven by paid signatures. That's how they got I don't know how many they got, but they got about 10,000 fewer than the Common Core ballot initiative, which a very small percentage of their signatures that they got. So what that shows you is that even people that are professionals at getting signatures were not able to get as many signatures as the folks who were driving the ballot initiative. It's a really kind of a remarkable story, and it tells you how profoundly unpopular this is with the electorate, and how hard these guys worked.
Thank you. Well, and we also appreciate the phenomenal work that Jamie and the Pioneer Institute have
So
done.
Patrick, what's the next stage? Okay, so
The next
go to
stage.
the legislature, they're probably going to
They
do
have
that.
to have
They're not going to do it.
They have to have a public hearing on every ballot initiative. I was told that by judiciary.
Theoretically, they could say, okay, well, it'll just go on the ballot. That will not happen. They will require that we get another 11,000 signatures. Now, the 65,000 and change and the 11,000 and change, those are based on prior voting history.
You have to get new signatures?
Yes,
Okay.
if I can continue. The idea is that they have to be brand new signatures. These can't be people that have signed before. So as we're gathering those signatures, we're probably going to be shooting for like 25,000 to 30,000 signatures. We're going to be telling people, well, look at what we had. We had 120,000 signatures that we gathered raw. We only had 80,000 certified. There's a 1 out of 3 chance that if you had signed, it may have been rejected for whatever reason. If handwriting's like a doctor's, if they ended up throwing the piece of paper away or whatever, all those things can happen. But we're probably going to shoot for double that number. That'll begin in May. I believe it's May 3rd. And we'll have, I think it's something in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks to gather those additional 11,000 certified. We're shooting for 25 to 30,000 raw signatures. After that's done, and those signatures are certified, we'll be given a ballot number, a ballot question number, and then we'll start in earnest the education effort. Well, actually, we're going to be doing the education effort now. That's what forums like this are all about. Getting out there, telling people about it, getting them ready so that when, it's not a matter of, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a matter of if, it will be when. When it gets on the ballot, we need to tell people about it. Okay. It'll be a yes vote to get rid of Common Core. It's an affirmative thing. And we will be doing that so that we can get rid of Common Core. It's going to be a huge education effort. Back in 2014, there was an organization called Tank the Gas Tax, and they gathered ballot signatures, an all volunteer effort again, and they got it on the ballot, and they ended up with getting it passed. They had gathered about $100,000 or so in donations. They're going up against AAA, who tossed in $3 million to keep the gas tax going from infinity, going from here to infinity, basically increasing by the CPI every year. We're going to be going up against Bill Gates.
And they're suing.
Well, yes, I'll get into a little bit about that. So we're going to be going up against Bill Gates. This is a battle, though, that we can win because the truth and common sense are on our side. That's all we really need. You show that math problem to parents and they're going, oh my goodness, this is how they're destroying my kids. Because those, as mentioned before, this really hurts children's self-esteem. This is really somewhat of a form of child abuse. It can be exceptionally it can be exceptionally frustrating if you get a problem right but told you're doing it wrong. Those tests that they have to take, if you're not doing it the Common Core way, you're graded wrong. You have to explain it to the nth degree. So let me just go on with the process. So there's going to be a large number of educational efforts. We're going to try to have as many as possible in the Boston area, but also throughout the state. As noted, we had 45 to 50 over the past year. We're going to be trying to, match that pace. Maybe I don't know if Jamie can last that long. Jamie was, as he noted, a real trooper. He attended probably 2/3 of those, and he and Dr. Stotsky probably went between 20 to 30 states across the country. Because these people, we are exceptionally blessed in Massachusetts to have such phenomenal people. The Pioneer Institute has been phenomenal. Dr. Stotsky, actually, I don't think he mentioned it. When they were reviewing Common Core standards, there were 2 educational experts that were, education standard setting experts that were on the validation committee. Dr. Sandra Stotsky and Professor James Milgram. Dr. Stotsky is English Language Arts, Professor Milgram Mathematics. They refused to sign off on the standards. Their names were removed from the committee, and the standards were validated, quote unquote. We are very fortunate to have such experts in this state, and they've been going, as noted, they've been going across the country and talking about it. The truth is on our side on this.
Is there an imbalance between Republican and Democratic governors who implemented Common Core?
Not initially.
Common Core was put in place in 45 states. I know that it comes to mind really easily is Texas never bought into it.
How many have rejected it now? So we're down to 40 now because 5 or 6 have not.
No, it's more than that.
No, there's so West Virginia is in the process of a repeal. Indiana sort of partially got themselves out. Oklahoma got themselves out. South Carolina kind of got themselves out. There's ongoing lawsuits in Louisiana. I mean, I think the thing is, it really is not a partisan issue. But if you look at the Republican presidential candidates, the ones that are at the top are opposed to it. The ones that were in favor of it are down in like the 3 to 4% category. I mean, I would say that, and on the flip side of that too, Governor Cuomo, who's certainly a Democrat, he's an ally of the president, pretty blue state. His approval rating related to education is just very, very low because even though he has put up these task forces to get his staff out, he's tried to kind of rebrand it. That's the model, is that whether it's a Republican or Democrat, is that they flood the state with Gates money to try to block it in the legislature, and they get the governor to put together some kind of rebranding, phony baloney rebranding. That's kind of the model, and it's not specific to one party or the other. It really is not a partisan issue at all, because on one side, the teachers' unions are generally opposed to it, and then on the other side of it, generally more right-leaning people are opposed to it. It is much, much less popular with Republicans than it is with Democrats, and that's different polling over the last several years.
Right. And speaking to that a little bit more, there's a gentleman, while we have a couple of excellent speakers here in Massachusetts, we also brought in a person by the name of Dr. Duke Pesta from Wisconsin. And he did a whole presentation on how he got up there and said, I could talk from a conservative perspective how bad Common Core is. But I'm going to sit back and I'm going to go through and show you all the liberals who are speaking very disparagingly about Common Core. So he noted there was a resolution from the Washington State Democrat Party where they came out against Common Core, right in Bill Gates' backyard. They talked about the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, who, under maybe less favorable circumstances, I could consider pretty much a communist in most other respects, but she was very much against Common Core. As noted, New York State, the teachers unions there are vehemently against Common Core. But and then talking with here in Massachusetts, that we've had a number of teachers unions that have been out, or teacher union members that have been out against Common Core as well. And just one thing to note about that, because this is kind of gets into the politics of it within Massachusetts. Come November, we're going to have Common Core on the ballot. We're also going to have charter schools on the ballot. Our organization deals just with Common Core, period. Our organizations, I should say, and Common Core MA and Common Core Forum. We are dealing just with Common Core. Many of our members may like the idea of lifting the charter school cap, but we're not going to go there because many of our allies are teachers who are against Common Core, but they're also against charter schools for various reasons, because they feel that oftentimes it cuts into their jobs, as it were. Yes.
I just have to comment on this example of mathematics. I was a straight A student in math in high school. I went off to study engineering. I took advanced courses in the mathematics of operations research. I won't get into what operations research is. But the instructor in this was teaching us numbers. The professor teaching it told us that we can teach this to kids in 3rd and 4th grade and they get it without any trouble at all. But you graduate students, you'll never get it because you learn the old way. Okay? I went back, my sister was taking the same algebra in high school that I took in high school with the same teacher. I looked at her textbook. I couldn't understand the thing. It was the new math.
Correct. I mean, that's...
And that was back in the 1960s, 1950s.
50s. No, 60s, that was me. I was new math. That's why I was a lit student in college, because of new math. Even as the son of a nuclear engineer, my math was new.
Well, the whole thing with Common Core, though, is also that Massachusetts bought into it even before the standards were fully complete, or actually, I think it was like a month or two after they were actually complete. The ink was barely dry. There was no testing done on it. There's no results that say, hey, this is better than what you have because we have this study, this study, this study. One of the funniest things you will hear from supporters of Common Core is that it's rigorous. It's rigorous.
Yeah.
Well, but from a teacher's perspective, though, and from many teachers that I've talked to, and I'm sure Kathleen will back this up, is yes, it's rigorous at the very low grade levels. You're really expecting a bit too much of them. Recess goes out the window. There's all types of things wrong. Being rigorous at the lower grade levels, and then at the higher grade levels, you're pushing algebra out a couple of years. You're more rigorous with the youngsters, but less rigorous with the people who are supposed to be getting ready for adulthood. It's all backwards. It's all backwards. We had, and so going forward, the message is very simple. We have had the highest standards in the country. We need to go back to them. We have the best results in the country. Since implementing core, they've dipped a little bit. We need to stop that slide. We need to go back and develop and maintain our own standards. One thing you're going to hear from the opposition is, oh, there's a cost involved. Yes, there will be a cost involved. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many people are familiar with Project Veritas, or the people who took down Acorn, the pimp and the prostitute person. Remember that from like 2009, 2010?
And goes up to New Hampshire and
James O'Keefe and Project Veritas.
How bad the voter ID system is there.
They've actually taken on Common Core, and they've gone out there with talking to textbook manufacturing companies, Houghton Mifflin. They haven't really talked directly to Pearson yet, although they've talked to former members of Pearson. So far, 3 executives have been fired because they were basically caught on camera saying, "I hate kids." It's all about the money. You change the curricula, we get more money. You change the way things are taught, more money. So there's a lot of people who are making a lot of money out there on it. Yes, it's going to cost money to go back. We bought one hell of an expensive Edsel. We traded in our Cadillac for an Edsel. We need to, and we made the Cadillac. We made the Cadillac here. We need to go back to the Cadillac we had. I guess we need volunteers. We need people to be involved. We're going to start collecting signatures in May. We can use all the volunteers we can get. We need to have outreach out there because, again, people, even though, for those of you who don't have students, you may not be that familiar with it, or many people aren't. But we need to do a whole line of education because there's going to be Gates money out there trying to beat us down and to stop this from happening. As mentioned earlier, there's a lawsuit.
To throw the ballot.
To say that this is an improper ballot question. It was fully vetted before by the Attorney General and the Secretary of State. Now, we're not the subject of the ballot of this lawsuit. It's actually, they're suing the governor, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General saying this is an invalid ballot initiative.
It sounds rather technical.
It's a very technical thing. Is it really in the Constitution that they can be talking about this, etc.? It's the same questions that were asked before. They actually tried to sue before. They questioned this before. Now they're doing it again. They're just trying to obfuscate the problems. They're trying to derail us. They're trying to switch our attention from here to there. It's not going to work. We are going to be very focused on this. We're going to be educating people. We're going to be holding more forums like this. Yes.
I see some young folks here who mentioned the Cadillac and the Edsel. I wonder if they know what the Edsel is.
You're right. Maybe I should have used the Yugo or the Pinto or what's been
those better
actually no, because we actually sat around trying to figure out what's a really bad car. Edsel, I think some people are familiar with.
Maybe a Yugo.
I mean, a fair amount of this is messaging. So if we got any people who are in professional advertising people, we would love to talk to you because we could really use some help on trying to figure out how to hone and craft this message we're sending out. Yes.
Say you defeat Common Core. So the yes on whether to defeat them. What happens then? Do we automatically go back to?
Let's just get there.
What was, or do we have to still go with this version 2?
That was my question.
Okay, going back to
Does it do anything about MCAS 2.0?
Okay, first of all, MCAS, as Jamie noted, MCAS has evolved already. I mean, for the longest time, and that was another thing that we had done over the years, several years past, was encouraging people to opt out of PARC. You can opt out of these tests. If you don't believe it, we have the paperwork from the people at the Department of Education that says you can. You just need to fill out a form. And in spite of the teachers attempting to bully your students or your children, you can opt out. With MCAS, this 2.0 is just another dodge. When the 2.0 of it is, oh, they're going to be probably trying to utilize some of the Pearson content. My thought is, how much is Pearson going to be getting for that effort and not having to do anything long term? That really is something that really boggles my mind, that I don't see where, can we improve MCAS? Absolutely. Should we always be evolving? Yes, we can. But we should be doing it ourselves. We don't need to have another entity out of Pearson is a company from Great Britain.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, they publish the books, right?
Right.
They publish the books,
We're going to buy the books from them.
well, not necessarily.
So we're going to
Texas
So
is
is
a
it an
huge
EU
textbook
project?
publishing company.
Is it
Actually, if you
EU?
go to look at those Project
Common
Veritas
Core?
videos,
No.
they talk about how upset people are with the curricula of Common Core, how it sounds like it's very agenda driven. I'm not going to get all conspiratorial on you, but there's a fair amount of concern about that out there.
This is in Texas?
No, this is happening, this is of the current content. What I'm saying is as far as Texas is concerned, Texas is a huge textbook market. And oftentimes people,
Textbooks on history and what we look here.
Texas oftentimes sets the standards in textbooks.
But we have to start to wrap this up.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
only going
right.
to say, really, getting rid of Common Core is the first step. Getting rid of Mitchell Chester is the second step. Because otherwise, we'll just get, the wine, the new wine will be poured into the old bottle.
What was
Can you tell them about
Mitchell
the
Chester.
documentary, Building the Machine?
Mitchell Chester.
Because they might want to watch
Okay,
that.
quick, you get
Oh.
up quickly.
Bring Mr. Hirsch back.
If you want a 39-minute documentary on how this was established, it's called Building the Machine.
You can find it online.
Yeah.
Yep.
Building the Machine, it's online, it has Dr. Stotsky, it was helped put out by Pioneer Institute.
Yep.
Phenomenal
Oh, that's what they said
documentary.
Is it on the internet?
It is it's on YouTube on the internet, yes. Building the Machine.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic. Also, any of the videos in Common Core, we have
I'm going to make
the
one
majority of the
comment.
All right,
forums
got it
there.
quickly?
Yes.
Okay, I went up, I covered the public hearings at the State House, so I was talking to Judiciary, the council, and he said for every petition initiative that's on the ballot, whatever, they have to have a public hearing at the State House.
Yes.
So I don't
That
have,
is our
There was going to be one.
civilian,
Yes, there was going to be a,
independent coverage of what goes on in the State House.
Right.
On her own initiative, she records the government meetings up there and posts things that the newspapers don't cover.
yes, there was supposed to have been a hearing that snow day that we had about a week and a half
oh,
ago.
right.
It was supposed to have occurred, but hey, it snowed, so we had to shut the state down.
Right.
So they have not rescheduled it yet that
Right.
I'm aware of.
So the whole issue is that other than just, if somebody has to completely watch the State House all the time. And now that until elections or until this thing is solved, getting these things on the ballot, somebody needs to be in the gallery watching them. It's unbelievable what they will pull. So I'm just letting you know. I try to cover that stuff.
Okay.
And, okay.
So just
Thank you.
just a quick note, we have Jamie has several handouts up here. I also brought a handout, why people should be concerned about the Common Core from Dr. Stotsky. We also have some of the push cards. We also have a sign-up sheet so that people want to become involved in this. We need regional captains, we need town captains, because this is going to be a big effort that's going to be coming up. So any help. Also, it is an expensive thing. We probably won't be raising that much money, but we do need every penny that we can get, because push cards, signs, maybe even a little bit of advertising is not cheap. It's not free. Thank you.
All right, I was going to have a brief break because it's getting late, so I'm going to move things along. The next half of the meeting has to do with the races for state committee and the elections that will be occurring on March 1st. The Massachusetts presidential preference primary, the state committee offices elections, and the wards and town committee elections, all on what is known as Super Tuesday. We have 3 candidates for state committee in the 2nd Suffolk District. If you don't already know, by law, by Massachusetts law, an official party has to have a state committee man and a state committee woman for every senatorial district in the state, if you are an official party, which usually means that you gotta get about 3% in a general election, in a statewide election. So there's the Republicans and there's the Democrats. I think Evan Falchuk's party is the official one too, right? I don't even remember what his name is. He was the third party guy.
Evan Falchuk.
Yeah, Falchuk. Anyway, tonight we are listening to the candidates for Republican State Committee in the 2nd Suffolk Senatorial District, which is the only senatorial district completely within the confines of Boston. And I would like to ask Rachel Kemp to speak first. She is the city committee chair in Boston, and she is chair for Ward 14? No? Okay.
There's a man who is actually
okay.
the chair of Ward 14.
And she is also our state committee woman, and is running again. Rachel.
Thank you. Well, I thank you, Ed, and thank you all. I know it's late, and but we had such an incredible amount of information that was put forward this evening. Because if you're not clear about what Common Core can do to Massachusetts, this was a very good example. But I will tell you that during this presidential election cycle, I've become concerned and I've pondered. And I'm not really concerned about the people who are going to lead America back to its greatness. I'm concerned about the grassroots, the people who actually constitute. Talking to the microphone. Okay. It does work. Okay. Who've given real meaning to our political activism. And in the context of this political activism, there's this little known group called State Committee. Now, most of you know exactly what State Committee does. We're 80 men and women who represent all of the districts across the Commonwealth. And I'm here to say that I'm looking to run and to be the State Committee woman for the 2nd Suffolk District again. And as a member of the State Committee, I've really learned the real process of this elected party body. And, you know, some people will say it's to help to lower taxes and other related policy initiatives, but I would say that that's really an indirect purpose. The real purpose of State Committee is to engage, to excite, and to educate the grassroots. Because we also must engage with them so that we hear the voices, because that's what we do in State Committee. We represent the collective voices of everyone here in the Commonwealth. So I'm going to actually cut my prepared comments much shorter. And I could stand here and tell you all about the things that I've done as a State Committee woman. You know, I lead the outreach committee to broaden the base within the State Committee. And it's not about diversity, it's about inclusion, which are two very different things. I've represented, or I had the honor of being the co-chair of the Government Reform Subcommittee on the National Republican Committee platform in 2012. And before the Mass Women's Federation became, let's call it a defunct organization, I was elected to be their first vice president. So it's really not about me telling you all the wonderful things that I've done and who I've met, but it's to really say that I'm looking forward to being the voice of the grassroots and taking that back to the State Committee to begin to shape the direction that we're moving in. So when you go in on March 1st to vote in the presidential primary election, remember, vote your voice and give me your vote. Thank you very much.
So in the race for state committee man in the 2nd Suffolk, there are 2 candidates. One is the incumbent and the one is the challenger. Brendan, since you're the incumbent, I invite you to speak first. Brendan O'Connell is a member of Ward 19. I think he's one of the officers, and he lives in the Moss Hill section of Jamaica Plain. He is the owner, producer of Life Matters television program, which you can get on community access and all over the state. And he has been our state committee man since the last election in 2012. 2012.
Thank you. I think that what I try to do is talk the truth, first of all. And we've had a seismic change in the state committee when there are 80 members, and about 64 of them were liberals, or rhinos, if you want to call it that. But there was a certain corruption that developed in the state committee. And in 2012, the conservatives ran people that are not only fiscally but socially conservative. They ran a bunch of people. And there was a seismic change. 38 out of the 80 seats changed. And now we had 36 conservatives to 44, what I'll call liberals or middle of the road type of people. And there was, all of a sudden, instead of it just being a cocktail party and, you know, worshiping Scott Brown, we now had a situation where we had a real battle going on within the state committee. And one of the great things is we had a professional parliamentarian who took on the other side and did a fantastic job. And because we showed up, and I was at every single state committee, I might have been the only state committee person that was at every single meeting, all 16, plus we organized another state committee meeting because of the questionable behavior of the people that were tallying the votes, particularly when it came to Bob McGinn stepping down, and he oversaw a vote in which the vote was 39 to 38 with 2 abstentions. And what happened was that one of the ballots was challenged because instead of, it said, who was the fellow that ran against Kirsten? Rick Green.
You're talking about the
The
race
ballot
for state
said
committee chair.
RG instead of Rick Green. Okay, so it would have been a tie, 39 to 39 with 2 abstentions. Interestingly enough, Scott Brown was heavily lobbying the 8 or 10 people that were on the fence, and he converted a lot of them. And so we re-voted. And while they were re-voting, the other side got up and said, "Oh, we just found another ballot for Kirsten Hughes." Now, these are the people that have been running the state committee, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw what was going on. I said, this is really bad news. Well, it turns out Rick Green lost 41 to 39, and the very next morning, Scott Brown announced, before I could even turn on the radio, Scott Brown announced that he was not going to run against Markey. So in other words, he used all his leverage to lobby for Kirsten Hughes. Now this went on and on. We put up a special meeting. We got totally stonewalled by the other side, and Rick Green tried to be, you know, cordial and that sort of thing. But it led down the road where they had to hire a parliamentarian to deal with our parliamentarian. Also, I don't know if you went to the convention, but the convention, we had one vote. There was just one vote on not all these positions, but just one vote. But some of the conservative people, like Ad Vanola,
he was precluded from speaking. He was running for U.S. Senator. He was precluded from speaking because they were going to charge him $30,000 or something like that to get up there and give a speech. This is wrong. This is wrong what they're doing. The votes were on recorded, and the challenger to the current governor got the requisite 15%, but they tried to say he didn't, and they dragged it out. And what happened then is that once they were going to be interrogated by the opposing attorney, deposed is the word, that's when they settled for over $250,000, or right around $250,000. They settled so that they didn't have Kirsten Hughes and a few of the other people, so that they didn't have to be deposed.
If you were a delegate at that convention and you were charged almost $100 for the privilege of acting as a citizen, well, now you know where the money went.
Right. So this shenanigans has got to stop, okay? So now what's gone on is Charlie Baker doesn't like our side. So he's putting up other people, and he's spending all the money that we contributed to the Charlie Baker campaign. He's spending it on all these people, like my opponent. He's just giving them money, and all these mailings are coming out from Charlie Baker. They're very generic. They're milk toast. But that's what's going on. In fact, in one community, the guy running against Steve Aylward last year was a Democrat from New York City. Now, a lot of these people have jobs in the Baker's administration, and it's important to realize that people that have jobs in the Baker administration can't go out and raise money for future candidates that are trying to run for office.
By state law.
By state law. So he's got, for instance, my opponent's brother works for Charlie Baker. He came up from Washington, D.C. to work for Charlie Baker. He has his wife running against one of our conservative people in Revere. Okay, so this is the game that's being played right now, is that Charlie Baker is trying to take over the state committee again so that it can be just a rubber stamp for him. And I hope that you folks won't let that happen, that you'll vote for me come March 1st. Thank you.
Brendan, I have just one question. I'd like you to describe for us the vote that occurred in the state committee last October. What was that issue?
Well, that was a very important issue because, again, the other side was trying to consolidate power, take it away from the grassroots. They were trying to take it away from the grassroots. Again, we showed up. I didn't even know about it till about a week before that this vote was going to occur. But there's a caucus that happens leading up so that people, all of you can actually go to the Republican convention. If you get enough people to vote.
Presidential convention.
The presidential convention, which will be in Cleveland. And the other side wanted to put a slate together or something, I'm not sure what, but basically they wanted the candidates to be able to pick who they would like to go to the convention, meaning all their wealthy donors. And we said no. And the vote was close. It was 37-35 or 37-36, but our side won. They were very angry that they lost. They thought they had a cakewalk, but our side won. So that was a big victory for us. And, you know, considering that we had 36 and they had 44, we obviously, there were some people that flipped, some people that are on the other side, and some of our people flipped on that particular vote, but not many, but maybe 3 or 4 on either side. So that was a big victory for us, and of course the Baker campaign didn't like that because it takes power from them. But you know what, Charlie Baker needs to not be involved with the state committee, he needs to be involved with what's out there, all the problems that we have in this state right now. And I think he's doing a good job on the fiscal side. I'm not with him on the social side, but that's basically where I stand. Thank you.
George? George is the challenger. He is running to be state committee man for the 2nd Suffolk. He's a resident of JP, I think a lifelong one. And he is in Ward 19. you are still on paper the chairman of Ward 19.
Yes.
Here, let me,
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm George Regis, the chairman of Ward 19.
George.
Yes, I decided recently to run for state committee because I wanted to stay connected with the committee campaign and the community at large, and to grow our party at the local level, to get in touch with them. As I was getting the signatures for to get on the ballot, I was finding that some people didn't know what a state committee man was or what they did. I explained to them what they did. They had to go out to the community, try and get them involved with their ward committee, or that they would elect the state committee leadership, etc., help and do outreach. So that's why I was running, not for any other reason, not because someone put me up to it or anything. It was just my own decision to do this. In reference to like other races, I don't get involved in those other races. I don't get involved in smear attacks on anybody at all. I'm just here to get people involved in the Republican Party, get them, either, whether it's Ward 19 or other wards throughout the 2nd Suffolk, so they can run city council, state rep, state senate, get more people to do what's right for education, like we have here with the Common Core, to get the Common Core out of here, out of the state, get it repealed, get the increase on the charter schools, get more fiscal responsibility in the state Senate and the state legislature, etc. So when you go on March 1st, please consider me for your vote. Thank you.
George, I just have a couple of questions, and believe me, this is near the end, so I'm not going to be long. Yes, this showed up on our mailboxes, at least Republicans in the 2nd Suffolk. It's a very impressive mailer with a letter. You have been endorsed by the governor, correct? But when I look at it, and Charlie says, George has the experience to help build the Republican Party in Massachusetts. I know George will stand with me in the fight to lower taxes, rein in out-of-control spending, expand access to great schools, end the democratic culture of corruption and Now, my question to you is, what does that have to do with what a state committee man does?
In a way that what we do is we'll call people, we'll get them involved, to say like wards 10, 11, 19, or Ward 18, South End, get them in touch with their respective ward communities. Maybe get in touch with people who want to run for state rep, state senate,